The fluorescent lights in SaveMart buzzed like dying insects, casting everything in a sickly yellow-green that made the wilted produce look even worse than it probably was. I stood in the cereal aisle, doing math in my head that had become as automatic as breathing. $3.49 for the store brand. $4.99 for the name brand Mom actually liked. 2 boxes of the cheap stuff would last longer than 1 box of the good stuff. But Mom barely ate anymore anyway, so maybe quality mattered more than quantity. My phone buzzed. I pulled it from my jacket pocket with hands that smelled like bleach and pine sol despite scrubbing them twice after my shift. The screen showed 7:43 p.m. and a text from Mom's neighbor, Mrs. Chen. "Your mother asking for you? Says she needs her medication, but I don't know which bottle." I closed my eyes and counted to 5, pushing down the panic that wanted to rise. Mom knew which medication. We'd organized them together just 3 days ago, labeled everything clearly with times and dosages. If she was confused about something that basic, it meant the pneumonia was worse, or the fever had spiked again, or her mind was starting to slip from the infection the way it had last winter. I typed back quickly. "Blue bottle, 2 pills, on the kitchen counter. I'll be home in 30 minutes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." 30 minutes was optimistic. I still had to finish shopping, take the bus across town, climb 4 flights because the elevator in our building had been broken since August, and hope Mom hadn't gotten worse in the time it took me to get there. But Mrs. Chen needed a time frame, needed to know someone was coming, so I gave her one that sounded reasonable, even if it probably wasn't. I grabbed 2 boxes of the cheap cereal and kept moving. My cart was already half full with the essentials that would stretch across the next 2 weeks. Rice, dried beans, eggs, chicken thighs that were on sale, frozen vegetables that cost half what fresh cost. Everything calculated down to the penny because I had exactly $83.17 until Friday's paycheck, and 42 of that was already allocated to the rent extension our landlord had grudgingly agreed to after I'd begged. The grocery store was nearly empty at this hour, just the night shift workers and people like me who couldn't shop during reasonable times because we were too busy cleaning other people's messes. I recognized a few faces from my building, other women with tired eyes and practical shoes, doing the same mental arithmetic I was doing, making the same compromises between what they wanted and what they could afford. I was reaching for a carton of milk when I noticed her. An elderly woman stood by the dairy case, one hand resting on a cart that held maybe 3 items. She wore a cream-colored coat that had probably been expensive once but now showed signs of wear at the cuffs and collar. Her silver hair was pulled back in a bun that was coming loose, strands escaping around her face. But it was her expression that made me pause. The way she was staring at the milk options with a confusion so profound it looked like pain. She reached for a carton, hesitated, pulled her hand back, reached again, stopped. Her other hand trembled slightly where it gripped the cart handle. I should have kept walking. I had my own problems, my own sick mother waiting at home, my own tight timeline. But something about the way she stood there, lost in a place as ordinary as a grocery store dairy aisle, reminded me of Mom last winter when the fever had gotten so high she'd forgotten where she was. "Excuse me," I said gently, approaching slowly so I wouldn't startle her. "Can I help you find something?" She turned to me, and her eyes were a pale blue that made me think of faded denim. For a moment, she just looked at me, and I could see her trying to process who I was, why I was talking to her, whether she knew me or should know me. "I need milk," she said finally, her accent thick and musical. Italian, maybe. But I cannot remember which kind. My son, he tell me, but I forget. "What does your son usually drink? Whole milk? 2% skim?" "2." She said it with certainty, then immediately looked uncertain. Or maybe whole? I am not sure. My memory, it is not good today. That's okay. How about we get 2%? That's what most people drink. Right in the middle. I reached past her and grabbed a carton, placing it gently in her cart. If it's wrong, you can always exchange it. Relief washed over her face so completely that I knew this small decision had been overwhelming her. Thank you. You are very kind. She looked down at her cart, at the 3 items sitting there: milk, a loaf of bread, a container of soup, and confusion clouded her expression again. I come here for something else, something important. But I cannot remember what. B, please continue. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mrs. Chen. She's asking for you again. Keeps saying she can't breathe right. I looked at the elderly woman, at the fear starting to creep into her eyes as she struggled to remember why she'd come here, what she was supposed to buy. I thought about Mom at home, struggling to breathe, and how terrified I'd be if I were her age and alone in a store, unable to remember something as basic as my shopping list. Do you have a list? I asked. Maybe in your purse or pocket? She patted her coat, checking pockets with increasing agitation. I had paper. I write everything down, but I cannot find it now. That's all right. Let's think through it together. You have milk, bread, soup. What else does your household usually need? Eggs? Fruit? Coffee? Coffee. Yes, coffee. My son, he drank much coffee. The relief was back, immediate and grateful. She started to turn her cart, then stopped, the confusion returning. But where is coffee? This store, I do not know it well. I glanced at my phone. 7:51. Mom needed me. Mrs. Chen needed me to come home. Every minute I spent here was a minute Mom was suffering. But this woman looked so lost, so frightened of her own mind betraying her. I'll show you, I said, making a decision that would cost me time I didn't have. It's just a few aisles over. I guided her through the store, helping her find coffee, then eggs when she suddenly remembered those, then pasta because she said something about Sunday dinner. She moved slowly, her cart a stabilizer as much as a shopping tool, and she kept forgetting what we were looking for mid-aisle. Each time I'd gently remind her, redirect her attention, and watch relief replace fear in her faded blue eyes. At the pasta sauce section, she stopped completely, staring at the rows of jars with an expression that suggested she was seeing something overwhelming rather than simple marinara options. My mother, she makes sauce from nothing, she said softly. Tomatoes from garden, basil, garlic. She never used jar. Her voice carried such profound sadness that I knew she wasn't just talking about pasta sauce. She was mourning something bigger, some loss of capability or identity or the world as she'd known it. Jarred sauce is okay, I said gently. It's different, but it's okay. What brand does your son like? I do not know. I used to know everything he liked. Now I know nothing. She looked at me with eyes that were suddenly clearer, more present. You must think I am foolish old woman who cannot even shop for groceries. I don't think that at all. I think you're someone having a hard day, and that happens to everyone. I picked up a mid-range sauce. Nothing fancy but not the cheapest option. This one's good. It has basil and garlic, like your mother's sauce. Maybe that's close enough for today. She took the jar from me, studying the label like it held secrets. Then she placed it carefully in her cart and looked at me with such intensity that I felt seen in a way I rarely did. People didn't usually look at cleaning women. Not really. We were invisible labor, present, but not acknowledged. But this woman looked at me like I mattered, like my kindness meant something. What is your name? She asked. Maya Santos. Maya. She repeated it slowly, like committing it to memory. I am Lucia Rossi, and you are very kind girl, Maya Santos. Your mother. She raised you well. The mention of my mother made my throat tight. Thank you. I should probably finish my shopping, but will you be okay getting through checkout? Yes. Yes. I am okay now. You help me remember what I need. You help me not be so afraid. She reached out and squeezed my hand with fingers that felt papery and cold. God bless you, kind girl. I finished my shopping quickly after that, mind already calculating the fastest bus route home. At checkout, I ended up in line behind Lucia, watching as she fumbled with her wallet, counting bills slowly while the cashier waited with barely concealed impatience. The total came to $42.63. Lucia counted out $40, then started searching through her coin purse with increasing agitation. I have it. I know I have more money. I count before I leave home. But her hands were shaking now, coins spilling onto the counter, rolling onto the floor. The cashier sighed, loud enough that everyone could hear. Ma'am, you're holding up the line. I am sorry, I just need moment. Look, do you have the money or not? I watched Lucia's face crumble, watched her hands shake harder as she tried to gather the scattered coins. Behind me, someone muttered about slow old people. The cashier started to reach for Lucia's bags, clearly preparing to void the transaction. I stepped forward, pulling 3 bills from my own wallet. Here, I've got it. The cashier looked at me with surprise, then took the money without comment. I helped Lucia gather her coins from the counter, pressing them back into her hand. You do not have to, she started. It's done. Don't worry about it. But this is your money. You need for your family. I need to get home to my mom, and you need to get home to your son. This way, we both get where we're going faster. I managed a smile I didn't quite feel, thinking about the $3 I'd just spent, the $3 that would have to come from somewhere else in my carefully balanced budget. Lucia's eyes filled with tears. She said something in rapid Italian, a stream of words I couldn't understand but could feel, gratitude and blessing and some kind of promise, all mixed together. Then she pulled a small card from her purse, worn and laminated, with an image of a saint I didn't recognize. For you, she pressed it into my hand, protection, for kind heart. Before I could respond, she'd gathered her bags and was walking toward the exit with that slow, careful gait that suggested every step required concentration. I paid for my own groceries, trying not to calculate how the missing $3 would impact the rest of my budget. It was done. I'd made a choice to help someone who needed it, and dwelling on the cost wouldn't change anything. The bus ride home took 40 minutes because of construction detours. I sat with my grocery bags on my lap, staring at the Saint card Lucia had given me, tracing the worn edges with my thumb. The image was faded, but I could make out a figure with outstretched hands, offering benediction or maybe just asking for help. On the back, someone had written a phone number in blue ink that was bleeding at the edges. My phone buzzed. Mom this time, not Mrs. Chen. Where are you, baby? I can't find my medicine. Blue bottle, kitchen counter. Mrs. Chen can help you. I'm almost home. I looked. It's not there. It was there. It was definitely there because I'd put it there myself this morning before leaving for work. But arguing wouldn't help, would only agitate her more. Okay, Mom, I'm almost there. 10 more minutes. Can you wait for me? I don't feel good. My chest hurts. Fear spiked through me, sharp and cold. Hurts how? Like pressure or sharp pain? Just hurts. And I'm so tired, Maya. So tired. I know, Mom, I'm coming. Just rest, okay? I'll be there so soon. The bus couldn't move fast enough. I watched blocks crawl by, each stoplight an eternity, each passenger boarding or exiting, stealing seconds I didn't have. My groceries felt heavier with every passing minute, the weight of survival pressing into my legs. When the bus finally reached my stop, I practically ran the 3 blocks to our building, bags cutting into my palms. The stairs were their own special hell. 4 flights with my breath coming harsh and my legs burning, but I took them faster than I should have, driven by the image of Mom alone and struggling to breathe. Our apartment was on the 4th floor at the end of a hallway that always smelled like someone's cooking and someone else's cigarettes. I fumbled with my keys, finally got the door open, and found Mom exactly where I'd left her this morning, in the worn armchair by the window, wrapped in the quilt her mother had made 30 years ago. She looked smaller than she had this morning, frailer. Her skin had a grayish tone that scared me, and her breathing was shallow and rapid. "Mom, I'm here." I dropped the groceries and went to her, pressing my hand to her forehead. Hot. Too hot. "Your fever's up again." "The medicine," she said weakly. "I couldn't find it." I went to the kitchen. The blue bottle was exactly where I'd left it, right on the counter next to the coffee maker. But I understood now. Mom hadn't been able to see it. Or her mind had convinced her it wasn't there. Or the fever had scrambled her thoughts enough that she'd looked directly at it without recognizing what she was seeing. I brought her the pills and water, helped her swallow them, then checked her temperature with the thermometer we kept in the bathroom. 103.4. Higher than this morning. The pneumonia wasn't getting better with the antibiotics. Or wasn't getting better fast enough. "We should go to the hospital," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We can't afford the hospital." "Mom!" "Maya, we can't. You know we can't." She grabbed my hand with strength that surprised me. "The antibiotics just need more time. It's only been 4 days." "You're getting worse, not better." "I'm fine. Just need rest." But her voice was thread, and the way she was breathing, quick and shallow like she couldn't get enough air, told a different story. I wanted to argue, wanted to call an ambulance or force her into a taxi or do something other than sit here watching her suffer because we couldn't afford the emergency room copay. But I'd learned years ago that arguing with Mom about money was pointless. She'd grown up poor, raised me poor, and had an iron resistance to accepting help or spending money we didn't have on things she considered survivable. "At least let me call the clinic," I said. "The nurse said to call if your symptoms got worse." "In the morning. I promise I'll let you call in the morning." She closed her eyes, exhausted from just this small conversation. "Did you get the groceries?" "Yeah, I got everything." "You're a good girl, Maya. Best thing I ever did." Her words slurred slightly, fever and exhaustion pulling her toward sleep. I sat with her until her breathing evened out, then went to put away the groceries. The refrigerator was nearly empty, just some condiments and leftover rice from 2 days ago. I stocked it with the things I'd bought, doing more mental math about how to make everything stretch. Chicken for dinner tomorrow, rice and beans the next night. Eggs for protein when the chicken ran out. The $3 I'd given Lucia kept nagging at me. $3 was one meal. $3 was bus fare for an emergency trip. $3 was the difference between making it to payday or having to choose between food and Mom's next prescription refill. But I couldn't regret it. Lucia had been so scared, so lost, and I'd been able to help. That had to count for something, even if it cost me. I made myself a peanut butter sandwich for dinner, too tired to cook anything substantial, and sat at our small kitchen table looking at the Saint card Lucia had given me. The phone number on the back nagged at me. Should I call? Make sure she'd gotten home safely? But it was past 10 now. Too late to call strangers. And besides, what would I say? "Hi, I helped your mother at the grocery store, just checking in." I set the card on the windowsill and went to check on Mom one more time before attempting sleep. She was still in the chair, her breathing still too fast, her skin still too hot. I got a cool washcloth and pressed it to her forehead, the way she used to do for me when I was sick as a child. "I've got you, Mom. I whispered. We'll get through this. I fell asleep on the couch, too worried to go to my own room, wanting to be close in case she needed me. My dreams were fragmented, anxious things. Grocery stores that went on forever, medicine bottles I couldn't open, phone numbers I couldn't read, and a woman with faded blue eyes telling me something important in a language I didn't understand. I woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of Mom coughing, deep and wet and frightening. By the time I got to her, she was struggling to catch her breath between coughs, her whole body shaking with the effort. Mom, we're going to the hospital. I don't care what it costs. No, no, just water. I need water. I got her water, helped her drink, rubbed her back while the coughing fit subsided. When she could finally breathe again, her voice was barely a whisper. I'm scared, Maya. Those 3 words broke something in me. Mom was never scared or never admitted it. She was the strong one, the one who'd raised me alone after Dad left, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep us fed, who'd taught me that Santos women didn't break no matter how hard life pushed. I know, Mom, me too. But we're going to be okay. I promise we're going to be okay. I didn't know if that was true. Didn't know if I could keep that promise. But I said it anyway, because sometimes the only thing you can offer someone you love is hope, even when you're running on empty yourself. The rest of that night passed in worried vigil, me dosing on the couch, but waking every hour to check on Mom, to make sure she was still breathing, still fighting. By the time gray morning light started filtering through our windows, I'd made a decision. I was calling the clinic the moment they opened. And if they said Mom needed to go to the hospital, we were going, even if it meant I'd be paying off the bill for the next 5 years. Some things were worth going into debt for. My mother's life was definitely one of them. At 6 a.m., I called my supervisor at the cleaning company to tell her I couldn't come in today. She wasn't happy, reminded me I'd already used my sick days for the year, told me this would go on my record. I apologized and didn't argue. My record didn't matter if Mom died because I was too busy scrubbing someone's toilet to take care of her. At 8:30, I called the clinic. The nurse listened to my description of Mom's symptoms, the high fever that wouldn't break, the difficulty breathing, the productive cough. Bring her in immediately, she said. Don't wait. If her symptoms are deteriorating after 4 days on antibiotics, she needs to be evaluated for possible hospitalization. Getting Mom downstairs was its own ordeal. She could barely walk, leaning heavily on me for every step. Mrs. Chen from next door saw us struggling and came to help, taking Mom's other arm while I called for a taxi because the bus wasn't an option, not with Mom this week. The taxi driver looked at Mom with concern when we got her in the back seat. Hospital? He asked. Clinic first. Maple Street Medical. I gave him the address and climbed in beside Mom, who was already falling asleep against my shoulder, her breathing still too fast, too shallow. The clinic visit confirmed what I'd feared. Mom's pneumonia had worsened into something the nurse called complicated pneumonia with possible sepsis. They started an IV right there, pumping her with stronger antibiotics and fluids, while a doctor I'd never seen before explained that Mom needed to be admitted to the hospital for intensive treatment. How long? I asked, trying to stay calm. At least 3 to 5 days. Possibly longer depending on how she responds to treatment. And the cost? He looked uncomfortable. The financial office can discuss payment plans, but Ms. Santos, your mother needs this care. Without it, the infection could become life-threatening. So we went to the hospital. Not by choice, but because the alternative was watching Mom die from an infection that modern medicine could treat. The ambulance they sent cost $300. I'd find that out later, but in the moment I was just focused on staying with Mom, on holding her hand, while they loaded her onto a gurney and connected her to monitors that beeped with numbers I didn't understand. At the hospital, they took her to a room on the 3rd floor, respiratory care unit. The nurses were efficient and kind, asking questions I did my best to answer while they worked around me, checking vitals, adjusting IV drips, making Mom comfortable in a bed that looked impossibly white and clean compared to our sagging mattress at home. "You should go home and get some rest," one nurse told me around noon. "She's stable for now, and visiting hours end at 8 anyway. Come back tonight." But I didn't want to leave. Didn't want Mom to wake up alone in this strange place, scared and confused. The nurse seemed to understand because she brought me a sandwich from the cafeteria and a pillow, letting me curl up in the chair beside Mom's bed. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, someone was touching my shoulder gently. I jerked awake, disoriented, my neck stiff from the awkward angle. A man stood beside me, tall, maybe early 30s, wearing an expensive-looking dark suit that seemed out of place in the sterile hospital room. His hair was black and carefully styled, his face sharp-featured and handsome in a way that probably made him used to getting what he wanted. But it was his eyes that caught me, dark brown, almost black, and currently fixed on me with an intensity that made me instinctively straighten in my chair. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, his voice low and controlled, carrying just a hint of the same Italian accent I'd heard from Lucia. "Are you Maya Santos?" Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. Strange men didn't approach you in hospital rooms knowing your name. Strange men in expensive suits especially didn't. "Who's asking?" I kept my voice quiet, aware of Mom sleeping just feet away. "My name is Lorenzo Rossi." He reached into his jacket and I tensed, but he only pulled out a wallet showing me a driver's license. "I'm Lucia Rossi's son. You helped my mother last night at SaveMart." Understanding clicked into place, followed immediately by confusion. "How did you find me here?" "My mother's caregiver noticed she had your name written on a piece of paper when we got home. She'd asked you while you were shopping together. When I reviewed security footage from the store to understand what had happened, I saw you paid for her groceries." He paused. "And I saw the name on your credit card." The way he said, "reviewed security footage," made it clear this wasn't a normal concerned son checking on his confused mother. This was someone with resources, with access to things regular people didn't have access to. "That's—" I tried to find the right word. "Invasive." "It is," he agreed without apology. "But my mother has Alzheimer's. She wanders sometimes, gets confused. When she came home with groceries but couldn't tell me how she'd paid for them, I needed to know what happened. I needed to know if someone had taken advantage of her or if something else had occurred. I didn't take advantage of her. She dropped some coins and the cashier was being rude, so I helped, that's all." "I know. I watched the footage. I saw you spend 20 minutes guiding her through the store, helping her remember what she needed. I saw you pay for her groceries with money you clearly couldn't spare, based on what you bought for yourself." His expression softened slightly. "My mother doesn't remember much from last night, but she remembers you. She kept talking about the kind girl who helped her, who wasn't impatient, who made her feel less afraid." I didn't know what to say to that. The whole situation felt surreal, talking to this wealthy stranger in my mother's hospital room about helping his confused mother buy pasta sauce. "I appreciate you finding me to say thank you, but I need to—" "I'm not here just to say thank you." He pulled out an envelope from his jacket. "I'm here to repay you for the groceries, and to offer you a job." "A job?" I looked at the envelope like it might bite me. "What kind of job?" "My mother needs someone to spend time with her, someone patient and kind who understands how to interact with Alzheimer's patients. She has medical care, nurses who handle medications and physical therapy, but she needs companionship, someone to talk with her, help her with daily activities, keep her engaged and feeling human instead of just managed." "I'm not a professional caregiver. I clean offices." "I know. I looked into your background." He said it casually, like invading someone's privacy was normal behavior. "You've been caring for your mother, who has chronic respiratory issues. You work 60-hour weeks for barely above minimum wage. You're 24, no college degree, supporting a sick parent on income that doesn't cover basic necessities. The fact that he knew all that should have made me angry, should have made me tell him to leave. Instead, I just felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't felt since I was a kid, and the social worker had come to evaluate whether Mom was fit to keep raising me. What I saw on that security footage wasn't professional training, Lorenzo continued. It was genuine compassion. That's what my mother needs. Someone who sees her as a person worth caring about, not just a patient to be managed. And what does this job pay? I asked, because at the end of the day, compassion didn't cover hospital bills. He named a figure that made my breath catch. Weekly. That was more than I made in a month at the cleaning company. That's too much, I said automatically. It's market rate for private companion care. For someone certified, I'm not certified. You're certified in what matters. He set the envelope on the table beside Mom's bed. That's $3,000. Payment for the groceries plus compensation for your time last night. Take it or don't. That's your choice. But the job offer stands regardless. $3,000. I could pay Mom's hospital bill with that. Could catch up on rent. Could buy groceries without doing mental math for once. Why? I asked. Why go to all this trouble for a stranger? For the first time, something shifted in Lorenzo's carefully controlled expression. Vulnerability, maybe, or pain. Because 5 years ago, my mother helped a young woman in a grocery store who was trying to buy food for her daughter. My mother paid when the woman's card was declined. She drove them home, made sure they had enough to eat. That woman wrote my mother a letter saying that kindness had kept her from giving up, that knowing a stranger cared had given her hope to keep fighting. He was quiet for a moment. My mother doesn't remember that now. She doesn't remember most things. But I remember. I remember what it meant to her, being able to help someone who needed it. So when I saw you do the same thing for her, when I saw you give money you desperately needed to help a confused old woman buy groceries, I knew I had to do something. I looked at Mom, sleeping fitfully in her hospital bed, at the IV pumping antibiotics that were keeping her alive, at the monitors tracking her heartbeat and oxygen levels. I thought about going back to the cleaning company, working 60-hour weeks and still barely surviving. I thought about the hope that had drained out of me over the past few years, replaced by grim determination to just keep going one day at a time. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course. Take your time. He produced a business card, setting it beside the envelope. My personal number is on there. Call anytime. After he left, I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were 30 crisp $100 bills. More money than I'd seen in one place in my entire life. Enough to change things, to give us breathing room, to make life something other than constant crisis management. I thought about Lucia, about her faded blue eyes and trembling hands, and the fear that had radiated from her in that grocery store. I thought about spending time with her, helping her feel less lost, giving her the kindness she'd once given to someone else. Maybe this was how kindness worked. You gave it when you could, even when it cost you, and sometimes, in ways you couldn't predict, it came back. I tucked the envelope into my purse and settled back into the chair beside Mom's bed. Tomorrow, I'd think about Lorenzo Rossi's job offer. Tomorrow, I'd figure out what came next. Tonight, I'd just sit with my mother and be grateful we'd both survived another day. Mom stayed in the hospital for 6 days. 6 days of watching antibiotics drip into her veins, of nurses checking vitals every few hours, of doctors making their rounds and speaking in careful medical language about significant improvement and responding well to treatment. 6 days of sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, eating cafeteria food I couldn't really afford, and fielding calls from my supervisor about when I'd be back to work. On the third day, I used some of Lorenzo's money to pay the hospital's financial office. They'd wanted a deposit, something to show we were serious about covering the bill. I gave them $500, watched the clerk's expression shift from skepticism to respect, and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was strangling me. On the fourth day, I called Lorenzo Rossi. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and professional. Lorenzo Rossi. It's Maya Santos, about the job offer. Yes. I heard papers rustling, him giving someone instructions in Italian to wait. Have you made a decision? I have questions first. Of course. Would you like to meet somewhere to discuss details? We agreed on a coffee shop near the hospital, neutral territory that didn't feel as intimidating as wherever he probably worked. He arrived exactly on time, still wearing expensive suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, still moving with that controlled precision that suggested he was used to people getting out of his way. But when he sat down across from me, when he really looked at me instead of through me the way most wealthy people did, I saw something else. Exhaustion, maybe? The weight of responsibility that came from caring for someone you loved, who was slowly disappearing. How is your mother? He asked before I could start with my questions. Better. They're saying she might be discharged in 2 more days if her oxygen levels stay stable. Good. I'm glad. He said it like he meant it, not just polite conversation. And how are you? The question surprised me. People didn't usually ask cleaning women how they were, not like they actually wanted to know the answer. Tired. Worried about medical bills. Worried about going back to work and leaving my mom alone too much. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. But we're surviving. That's something. It shouldn't have to be the goal, though. Survival. You should be able to do more than just survive. That's a nice thought for people with options. Which is why I'm offering you one. He pulled out a folder from the briefcase I hadn't noticed him carrying. Details about the position, responsibilities, compensation, benefits. I had my lawyer draw up a formal offer. I opened the folder, scanning the paperwork that looked more official than anything I'd ever signed. The weekly salary he'd mentioned was there in black and white, along with health insurance, paid sick days, and something called a family emergency fund that would cover unexpected medical costs up to $5,000 per year. This is too much, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. It's what the position requires. My mother needs consistent quality care. I'm willing to pay for it. He leaned forward slightly. Maya, I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you employment. There's a difference. What exactly would I be doing? The responsibilities section here is kind of vague. Spending time with my mother. 5 days a week, roughly 4 to 8 p.m. Reading with her, watching old Italian films, going through photo albums, taking walks in the garden when the weather's nice, cooking simple meals together. Things that keep her engaged and connected to herself for as long as possible. He paused. The nurse handles all medical care, medications, physical therapy. You'd be handling the human connection part. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. And on bad days? When she doesn't remember who I am or gets agitated? The nurse will be there. She'll handle any medical emergencies or serious behavioral issues. But from what I saw on that security footage, you have good instincts for redirection, for meeting people where they are instead of trying to force them back to reality. That's what I need. I read through the contract more carefully. Everything seemed straightforward, almost too straightforward. No weird clauses about being on call 24/7 or having to do other household tasks. Just companionship for an elderly woman with Alzheimer's, 5 days a week, generous pay and benefits. When would you need me to start? Whenever you're ready. After your mother is discharged and settled at home, I'd understand if you needed a week or two to make sure she's stable. And if it doesn't work out? If your mother doesn't connect with me the way she did that night in the grocery store? Then we part ways professionally. I give you 2 weeks severance and we both tried something that didn't work. No hard feelings. He slid a pen across the table. But I think it will work. I think you're exactly what my mother needs right now. I thought about going back to the cleaning company, to scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans and working until my back screamed. I thought about Mom alone in our apartment all day while I worked, struggling to breathe, struggling to remember her medications, struggling with everything that had become so hard for her. I thought about having health insurance, real health insurance that might cover some of Mom's future treatments. That might mean I wouldn't have to choose between her care and keeping the lights on. I need one thing added to the contract, I said. Name it. If at any point you or your mother feel uncomfortable with me being there, you can terminate my employment immediately. I don't want anyone feeling trapped or obligated. This works both ways or it doesn't work at all. He considered that, then nodded. Fair. I'll have it added. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. My lawyer will send a revised version within the hour. You can review it, sign digitally if you agree, and we'll start whenever you're ready. We talked for another 20 minutes about logistics. Where Lucia lived, a house in a quiet neighborhood about 30 minutes from my apartment by bus. What her typical daily routine looked like. How to contact the nurse if I needed help. How to reach Lorenzo himself in case of emergency. One more thing, he said as we stood to leave, about the money I gave you. That's separate from this employment arrangement. I don't want you thinking you owe me something beyond the job itself. I already spent some of it on the hospital bill. Good. That's what it was for. Use the rest for whatever you need. No strings attached. He offered his hand. Thank you for considering this, Maya. You're helping my family more than you probably realize. I shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the calluses that suggested he worked with his hands despite the expensive suits. I haven't actually said yes yet, but you're going to. I can see it in your face. He smiled slightly. You're someone who helps when you can, even when it's hard. This is just helping in a different way. He was right, annoyingly. I signed the revised contract that afternoon from Mom's hospital room, using the hospital Wi-Fi to review the digital document and adding my electronic signature. When the confirmation email came through, I stared at it for a long time, trying to process that I'd just changed the entire trajectory of my life by helping an old woman buy groceries. Mom was discharged 2 days later, instructions for continued antibiotic treatment and follow-up appointments overwhelming in their complexity. I got her home, settled her in her chair with blankets and tea, and explained about the new job. Reading to an old lady? She looked at me with concern. Maya, you're 24. You should be doing something with more future than companion care. It pays 3 times what I was making cleaning offices and comes with health insurance. That changed her expression. Health insurance. Real insurance. Real insurance that covers both of us once I'm past the 90-day probation period. She was quiet for a long moment, processing what that meant. Health insurance meant she could see doctors regularly instead of waiting until things got critical. Meant I could get the dental work I'd been putting off for 2 years. Meant we'd have a safety net instead of living one medical emergency away from bankruptcy. Tell me about this woman, Mom said finally. The one you helped. I told her about Lucia, about finding her confused in the grocery store, about helping her shop and paying for her groceries. I told her about Lorenzo showing up at the hospital with his envelope of cash and job offer. I left out the part about him reviewing security footage and investigating my background, figuring that would only worry her. When I finished, Mom reached for my hand. You're a good girl, Maya. You get that from your grandmother. She was always helping people, even when we barely had anything ourselves. She squeezed my fingers. But you be careful with this Lorenzo. Rich men with Italian last names and expensive suits. They don't usually make their money doing things you want to know about. I know, Mom. I'm being careful. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you walk away. No job is worth your safety. I promise. I started working for the Rossi family the following Monday. Lorenzo sent a car for me, an actual car with a driver who knew my name and address, which felt absurdly fancy for someone who'd spent the past 6 years taking public transportation everywhere. The driver, a quiet older man named Paul, assured me this would be my standard arrangement. No more buses, no more worrying about schedules. He'd pick me up at 3:30 and bring me home at 8:30, 5 days a week. The Rossi house was in a neighborhood I'd only seen in magazines. Large homes set back from tree-lined streets, yards that looked professionally maintained, cars in driveways that cost more than most people made in a year. The house itself was elegant but not ostentatious. 3 stories of pale stone with large windows and mature landscaping that suggested it had been there for decades. Lorenzo met me at the front door, looking more relaxed than he had at the coffee shop. He wore dark slacks and a gray sweater instead of a suit, his hair slightly less styled. Almost normal, if you ignored the watch that probably cost 5 figures and the fact that we were standing in a house that could fit 4 of my apartment inside it. "Welcome," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "My mother's having a good morning. She's in the sunroom with Patricia, her nurse." He led me through the house, pointing out rooms as we passed. The kitchen, large and modern with appliances I didn't recognize. The library, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books in English and Italian. The formal dining room, the sitting room, the study where he worked. Everything was elegant and understated. Money that didn't need to announce itself. The sunroom was at the back of the house, a space filled with plants and comfortable furniture and light streaming through large windows. Lucia sat in a chair by the window, a blanket across her lap, looking out at the garden. A woman in scrubs stood nearby, making notes on a tablet. "Mama," Lorenzo said gently, moving to his mother's side. "I have someone here to see you. Do you remember Maya from the grocery store?" Lucia turned, and for a moment her expression was blank. Then recognition flickered, slow but genuine. "The kind girl. You helped me find the coffee." Relief washed through me. "That's right, Mrs. Rossi. It's nice to see you again." "Lucia. You call me Lucia." She held out her hand, and I took it, feeling the papery skin and delicate bones. "You come to visit? I'm going to be spending time with you, if that's all right. Reading, talking, maybe watching some movies together." "I like movies. Old ones, with singing." Her smile was sweet and genuine. "You stay for lunch. I make sandwiches." Lorenzo caught my eye, and I saw the pain there. His mother hadn't made her own lunch in months, probably couldn't safely operate a stove anymore. But he didn't correct her, just smiled and said, "That sounds wonderful, Mama. Maybe Maya can help you." Patricia, the nurse, introduced herself properly and gave me a quick overview of Lucia's current status. Good day today. Lucid and calm, but that could change quickly. The medicine schedule was posted in the kitchen, but Patricia handled all of that. My job was just to keep Lucia engaged and comfortable. "She responds well to music," Patricia told me quietly while Lorenzo settled his mother back into her chair. "Old Italian songs. Frank Sinatra. That era. And she loves looking at photographs, though sometimes they confuse her about what year it is." Lorenzo left after another 20 minutes, off to handle business he didn't explain, leaving me alone with Lucia and Patricia. The nurse made it clear she'd be nearby if I needed anything, then disappeared into another part of the house, giving us privacy. I sat down across from Lucia, suddenly nervous. What did you talk about with an elderly woman who might not remember you from one minute to the next? What if I said something wrong? or triggered a bad memory, or made her agitated. You have kind eyes, Lucia said, studying my face. Like my mother. She always see best in people, even when people not show their best. Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was. Strong woman. Raised 7 children in Naples. Not much money, but always food on table. Always love in house. Lucia's expression went distant. I miss her. She make the best pasta from nothing. Just flour and eggs and her hands. Did she teach you to cook? Yes, yes. I learn everything from her. But now, she looked down at her hands with confusion. I forget things. Important things. My son, he say I have disease that steal memories. Alzheimer. Is this right word? The directness caught me off guard. Yes, that's the right word. Is scary, you know? To feel your mind slipping away, like trying to hold water in your hands. It just run through fingers. She looked at me with sudden clarity. You not afraid of me? Of my disease? No, I'm not afraid. Good. Is good. Many people they afraid. They not know what to say, how to act. They treat me like child or like I'm already gone. She reached for my hand. You treat me like person, like I still matter. You do matter. You matter a lot. We spent that first afternoon looking through photo albums. Lucia narrated stories about people and places from her childhood in Naples, her immigration to America in her 20s, her marriage to a man named Antonio who'd died 15 years ago. Sometimes she'd forget what story she was telling mid-sentence, or call me by someone else's name, but I'd gently redirect and she'd find her way back. When Lorenzo returned at 8, I found myself surprised by how quickly the time had passed. Lucia was tired but content, and Patricia reported it had been a very good day. Same time tomorrow? Lorenzo asked as Paul prepared to drive me home. Same time tomorrow, I agreed. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Paul picked me up every afternoon, drove me to the Rossi house, and brought me home at night. Lucia had good days and bad days, but more good than bad in those early weeks. We'd read together, mostly Italian poetry she'd memorized as a girl. We'd watch old movies, Fellini and De Sica films that made her laugh or cry, or sometimes both. We'd look at photographs and she'd tell me stories that sometimes changed in the telling but were always delivered with passion. Mom noticed the change in me, how I wasn't constantly exhausted anymore, how I'd started sleeping through the night instead of lying awake worrying about bills, how I smiled more easily, laughed at things that would have felt too frivolous before. This job is good for you, she said one evening while I made us dinner in our cramped kitchen. You seem lighter somehow. I like Lucia. She's sweet and funny and surprisingly sharp even when she's confused. I stirred the pasta sauce, actual jarred sauce I'd bought without calculating every penny. And Lorenzo he's a good employer. Fair, respectful, doesn't make me feel like help. You talk about him a lot. This Lorenzo. I do not. You do, baby. Every day, something about Lorenzo said this, or Lorenzo thinks that. She gave me a knowing look. He's handsome? This employer of yours? Mom, it's not like that. I didn't say it was. I just asked if he's handsome. He's objectively attractive, I guess. But it doesn't matter. He's my boss. That's it. But that wasn't entirely true, and I knew it. Over the weeks, Lorenzo had started staying later in the evenings, long after his workday should have ended. He'd check on his mother, then linger, talking with me about how the day had gone, asking my opinion on things, what activities Lucia had responded well to, what seemed to agitate her, whether I'd noticed any changes in her behavior or cognition. The conversations were professional, but they felt personal in a way that made me increasingly aware of him. The way he listened when I talked, actually listened instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. The gentleness he showed his mother even on days when she didn't recognize him, when she called him by his father's name, or forgot he was her son entirely. The rare smile that transformed his entire face from controlled and guarded to almost boyish. I was attracted to him. That was undeniable, and probably stupid. He was wealthy, powerful, operating in circles I couldn't even imagine. And there was something else. Something I'd started to notice in the carefully chosen words when he talked about his business. The phone calls he took in Italian that seemed more like negotiations with implicit threats than normal business dealings. Mom's warning echoed in my head sometimes. Rich men with Italian last names and expensive suits don't make their money doing things you want to know about. But he'd never been anything but respectful toward me. Professional boundaries carefully maintained even as our conversations deepened. And the way he cared for his mother, making sure she had the best care, the best environment, the best chance at maintaining her dignity as her mind betrayed her. That spoke to something genuine beneath whatever else he was. 2 months into the job, everything shifted. It was a Thursday afternoon, warm for October, and Lucia was having what Patricia called a moderate day. Not her best, not her worst. She recognized me but kept calling me by her sister's name, no matter how many times I gently corrected her. I was reading to her in the sunroom, an Italian language book about a peasant family during World War II, when my phone rang. Mom's number. "I need to take this," I told Lucia. "I'll be right back." But when I answered, it wasn't Mom. It was a man's voice I didn't recognize. "Is this Maya Santos?" "Yes. Who's this?" "This is Dr. Richardson from Mercy Hospital. Your mother was brought in by ambulance about 20 minutes ago. She collapsed at home. You're listed as her emergency contact." The world tilted. Collapsed? What happened? "Is she okay?" "She's stable, but we need you to come in. There are some decisions that need to be made about her treatment." I was already moving, grabbing my purse, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "I'm on my way. Please, tell her I'm coming. Tell her—" My voice broke. "Just tell her I'm coming." Patricia appeared in the doorway. "Maya? What's wrong?" "My mom. Hospital. I have to go." "Of course. I'll call Paul. Have him bring the car around immediately." Lorenzo appeared from somewhere in the house, taking in the scene with sharp assessment. "What happened?" "My mother collapsed. They took her to Mercy Hospital. I need to go. I'm sorry. I know my shift isn't over, but—" "Stop. Of course you need to go." He was already pulling out his phone. "Paul will take you. I'm coming with you." "You don't have to—" "I'm coming with you," he repeated, in a tone that suggested arguing was pointless. To Patricia he said, "Call Dr. Morrison. Tell him to meet us at Mercy. Family emergency." "Lorenzo, I can't ask you to call in favors for—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. Now let's go." The drive to the hospital was a blur. Lorenzo sat beside me in the back seat, his presence steady while I fell apart, making phone calls in rapid Italian to people I didn't know, arranging things I didn't understand. When we pulled up to the emergency entrance, he guided me through the automatic doors with a hand at the small of my back, found someone to direct us to the right floor, cut through bureaucratic delays with the kind of authority that came from being used to having doors open for him. Mom was in a room on the cardiac floor. When I saw her lying in that hospital bed, oxygen mask over her face, monitors beeping, IV lines running into both arms, something in me broke completely. I rushed to her side, taking her hand carefully around all the medical equipment. "Mom, I'm here. I'm right here." Her eyes opened, focused on me with obvious effort. Behind the oxygen mask, I saw her try to smile. Her hand squeezed mine weakly. A doctor appeared, Dr. Richardson I assumed, looking tired and professional. He glanced at Lorenzo, standing quietly near the door, then back at me. "Miss Santos, your mother had a cardiac episode. We stabilized her, but we need to run some tests. Her history of respiratory illness combined with the strain on her heart, we're looking at some serious concerns that need immediate attention. The medical terminology washed over me: cardiac insufficiency, pulmonary complications, risk of additional episodes, immediate intervention required. All of it translated to one thing: Mom was critically sick, and fixing it would cost money I didn't have. What are the options? I managed to ask. Dr. Richardson outlined treatment plans, testing protocols, possible procedures. Each one came with astronomical price tags, even with the insurance that wouldn't kick in for another month. I did math in my head and came up with impossible numbers, the kind that would require me to sell everything I owned and still fall short. I need time to figure out how to pay for this, I said, my voice hollow. Of course. We'll start with the immediate stabilization and testing, and we can discuss payment plans for ongoing treatment. After he left, I sat beside Mom's bed, holding her hand, trying not to cry because crying wouldn't help anything. Lorenzo had disappeared at some point, giving me privacy, but I felt his absence like a missing anchor. He returned 20 minutes later with coffee I didn't want, and determination in his expression. I spoke with Dr. Morrison. He's one of the best cardiac specialists in Chicago, and he's reviewing your mother's case now. He'll consult with Dr. Richardson, make sure she's getting optimal care. Lorenzo, I can't afford specialists. I can barely afford this admission. You're not paying for any of this. Yes, I am. That's not negotiable. Maya, listen to me. He pulled a chair close to mine, sitting down so we were at eye level. You've been taking care of my mother with kindness and patience and genuine compassion for 2 months. You've given her more good days than she's had in a year. Let me do this. Let me help. This isn't a few dollars for groceries. This is tens of thousands of dollars. I know what it is, and I'm telling you that money doesn't matter to me the way it matters to you. What matters is that your mother gets the care she needs, and that you don't have to choose between her health and your future. I wanted to argue, to insist on independence and dignity, and not being in debt to anyone. But Mom's hand was so fragile in mine, her breathing so labored even with the oxygen, and I was so tired of fighting alone. Why? I whispered. Why would you do this? Because you helped my mother when you had every reason not to. Because you show up every day and treat her like she matters. Because you're a good person dealing with impossible circumstances, and I have the resources to make those circumstances less impossible. He covered both our hands with his. And because somewhere along the way, you've become someone I care about. Not just as my mother's caregiver, as yourself. The confession hung between us, honest and raw in the sterile hospital room. Around us, machines beeped their steady rhythms, marking Mom's heartbeat and oxygen levels, measuring the fragile line between crisis and stability. I care about you too, I admitted. That's probably inappropriate given that you're my employer, but it's true. Then let me help. As someone who cares, not just as your employer. I looked at Mom, at the woman who'd raised me alone, who'd worked herself to exhaustion keeping us fed and housed, who'd taught me that Santos women were strong and self-sufficient. Then I thought about what she'd said when I took the job with Lorenzo. If anything feels wrong, you walk away. Nothing about this felt wrong. It felt terrifying and overwhelming and like accepting help I hadn't earned, but it didn't feel wrong. Okay, I said finally. Okay, thank you. Lorenzo stayed with me for hours, making phone calls, talking to doctors, arranging things I didn't have the energy or knowledge to arrange myself. When visiting hours ended and the nurses insisted I go home and rest, he was the one who convinced me that Mom was stable and I needed sleep. Paul drove us both to my apartment building, and Lorenzo walked me to my door despite my protests that he didn't need to. Get some rest, he said gently. I'll pick you up tomorrow morning and we'll go back to the hospital together. What about your mother? What about work? Patricia can handle my mother for a day, and work can wait. You need someone with you right now. He brushed a strand of hair from my face, the gesture tender and unexpected. Let me be that someone. I nodded, too exhausted to argue. He waited until I was safely inside before leaving, and I stood in my empty apartment trying to process everything that had happened in the past 6 hours. Mom was alive but critically sick. Lorenzo had just offered to pay for her treatment. And somewhere in the chaos, we'd both acknowledged that our relationship had become more than professional. I fell asleep that night thinking about his hand covering mine, his quiet strength in the middle of crisis, the way he'd looked at me in that hospital room like I was someone worth protecting. Tomorrow would bring more hospitals, more decisions, more navigating the complicated intersection of gratitude and attraction and need. But tonight, I let myself feel cared for in a way I hadn't felt in a very long time. Sometimes kindness came back to you when you needed it most, and sometimes it came back in ways that changed everything. Mom stayed in the hospital for 11 days. 11 days of cardiac monitoring, of specialists consulting, of treatment plans that involved medications with names I couldn't pronounce and procedures I didn't fully understand. 11 days of Lorenzo showing up every morning to drive me there, staying through difficult conversations with doctors, making sure I ate something even when food felt impossible. Dr. Morrison was everything Lorenzo had promised. Brilliant, thorough, and willing to explain things in terms I could actually understand. Mom's heart had been compromised by years of untreated respiratory issues, the constant strain of infection and inadequate oxygen wearing down the muscle until it couldn't function efficiently. The cardiac episode had been her body's way of saying enough, that something had to change, or the next episode might be the last. She needs rest, significant lifestyle modifications, and ongoing cardiac rehabilitation, Dr. Morrison told me on day 7. The good news is that with proper treatment, she can recover substantial function. The damage isn't irreversible, but it requires commitment to the treatment plan. I'll make sure she follows it, I promised, whatever she needs. He'd glanced at Lorenzo, standing quietly beside me, then back at me. You have a good support system. That makes a significant difference in recovery outcomes. Lorenzo arranged everything. A visiting nurse to check on Mom 3 times a week. Cardiac rehabilitation appointments at a facility 10 minutes from our apartment. Medications delivered monthly. A meal service that would provide heart-healthy food so Mom didn't have to cook. Equipment for the apartment. A proper oxygen concentrator. A medical alert system. A reclining chair that would help her breathe easier. I tried to keep track of what everything cost. Tried to calculate how long it would take me to pay him back. The numbers got overwhelming quickly. Tens of thousands of dollars. Maybe more. A debt I'd never be able to repay on my salary. Even my new salary that had seemed so generous 2 months ago. Stop, Lorenzo said on day 9, when he caught me making notes on my phone about payment schedules. Stop calculating debt. I need to know what I owe you. You don't owe me anything. Lorenzo, that's not realistic. This is tens of thousands of dollars. I can't just pretend that's not significant. He was quiet for a moment, looking out the window of the hospital waiting room where we'd retreated while Mom underwent another test. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. When I was 15, my father had a stroke. Massive, devastating. He survived, but he was paralyzed, couldn't speak, needed round-the-clock care. We had money by then, enough to afford the best treatment, but we hadn't always. If this had happened 5 years earlier when we'd first immigrated, when my father was still working construction and my mother was cleaning houses, we would have lost him. Not because the medical knowledge didn't exist, but because we couldn't have paid for it. He turned to look at me. I watched my mother work herself to exhaustion trying to give him the care he needed. I watched her make impossible choices between his treatment and keeping our apartment, between his medications and eating regularly. I was a teenager and completely powerless to help. All I could do was promise myself that if I ever had resources, I'd use them to make sure other people didn't have to make those choices. I'm not your responsibility, Lorenzo. Neither is my mother. No, you're not my responsibility. You're someone I care about who's in a situation I have the power to help with. That's different. He moved closer, his expression intense. Maya, I'm not trying to buy your gratitude or put you in my debt. I'm trying to make sure you don't lose your mother because of something as meaningless as money. Money isn't meaningless to people like me. I know. That's exactly why it should be used to help when it can. He took my hand, the gesture becoming more familiar over the past week. Please stop calculating debt and just focus on your mother's recovery. Everything else, we'll figure out later. Later felt like a promise and a threat all at once. But I was too tired to argue, too worn down by stress and fear and the constant vigilance that came with having a critically ill parent. So I nodded and let myself lean against his shoulder, accepting comfort I probably shouldn't accept from someone who is technically my employer. Thank you, I whispered, for everything. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you. His arm came around me, solid and warm. You would have found a way. You're stronger than you think. But I'm glad you didn't have to do it alone. Mom was discharged on day 11 with instructions, equipment, and enough medications to fill a small pharmacy. Lorenzo sent Paul to drive us home, but he came too, helping get Mom settled in her new chair, making sure everything was set up properly, that the oxygen concentrator was working correctly, that the emergency numbers were posted where I could find them quickly. Mom watched all of this with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When Lorenzo went to take a phone call in the hallway, she caught my hand. "This man," she said quietly. "He's in love with you. You know this, yes?" "Mom, it's not that simple." Love is always simple. Everything else is what makes it complicated. She squeezed my fingers with more strength than she'd had in days. "But Maya, you be careful. Men with that much power, that much money, they live in a different world than us. You can love him, but don't lose yourself in his world. Promise me." "I promise." Lorenzo returned, said his goodbyes, and left with instructions to call him if we needed anything at all. After he was gone, I sat in our small living room surrounded by medical equipment and expensive furniture that didn't quite fit, and wondered how my life had become so complicated so quickly. I returned to work at the Rossi house 3 days later, after Mom was stable enough that I felt comfortable leaving her for a few hours. The visiting nurse would be there in the afternoons, and Mrs. Chen had volunteered to check in periodically, but still I worried. What if Mom fell? What if she had another cardiac episode? What if the oxygen concentrator malfunctioned? "She's going to be fine," Lorenzo said during the drive to his house. "And if anything happens, Patricia can stay with my mother while I take you home immediately. Stop catastrophizing." "That's easy for you to say. Your mother is safely in your house with a full-time nurse." "My mother is dying by degrees while I watch helplessly. Don't assume my situation is less painful just because I have money to throw at it." The sharp honesty stopped my spiral of anxiety. "I'm sorry, you're right. That was insensitive. You're stressed and scared. I understand." He glanced at me. "But Maya, we need to talk about something. About what happened at the hospital. What I said to you." My stomach tightened. Here it came. The inevitable conversation where he clarified that he'd just been being supportive, that he hadn't meant anything romantic by his comments, that our relationship was and would remain strictly professional. "I meant it," he continued, "when I said you'd become someone I care about. I need you to know that wasn't just emotion in the moment. It's been true for weeks, maybe longer." "Lorenzo, let me finish. Please." He waited until I nodded. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you're dealing with your mother's health crisis and probably can't think clearly about anything else. I know I'm your employer and there's a power imbalance we have to be careful about. But I also know that what I feel for you isn't going away, and pretending otherwise feels dishonest. We'd reached his house. Paul pulled into the circular driveway and cut the engine, giving us privacy by getting out and walking toward the garage. I care about you too, I said quietly. I've been trying not to, telling myself all the reasons it's complicated and probably a bad idea. But I do. So what do we do about it? I don't know. I need to focus on my mom right now, make sure she recovers. And you need to focus on Lucia, on your business, on all the responsibilities you have. Maybe we just acknowledge that there's something between us and see where it goes naturally, without forcing anything. He considered that. I can work with that, as long as you know that I'm not going anywhere. Whatever time you need, whatever space you need to figure things out, I'll wait. That's not fair to you. Let me decide what's fair to me. He reached over, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. You're worth waiting for, Maya Santos, however long it takes. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. I'd spend mornings with Mom, making sure she ate breakfast, took her medications, did her breathing exercises. Mrs. Chen or the visiting nurse would arrive around 2, and Paul would pick me up to take me to the Rossi house. I'd spend 4 hours with Lucia, then return home to make dinner and spend the evening with Mom. It was exhausting, but manageable. Mom was improving steadily, her color returning, her breathing less labored. The cardiac rehabilitation was helping, and Dr. Morrison's treatment plan was working. She'd never be completely healthy again. The damage was too extensive for that. But she could have years instead of months. Quality of life, instead of just survival. Lucia was declining. Slowly, incrementally, but undeniably. She had more bad days than good now. Days when she didn't recognize Lorenzo at all, when she called him by his father's name or thought he was a stranger who'd broken into her house. Days when she couldn't remember how to work a fork or forgot that she'd already eaten lunch. Days when fear and confusion made her agitated, sometimes aggressive. I learned to roll with it, to meet her wherever she was mentally instead of trying to drag her back to reality. If she thought she was a teenager in Naples, I'd ask about her life there. Let her tell stories about a world that existed only in her fractured memories. If she thought I was her sister or her mother or some friend from decades ago, I'd play along, giving her the comfort of familiarity even if it was based on mistaken identity. Lorenzo watched me handle his mother's decline with something like wonder. "You're so patient with her," he said one evening after a particularly difficult day where Lucia hadn't recognized anyone. "Even when she's combative or scared, you never get frustrated." Getting frustrated wouldn't help her. She's not trying to be difficult. She's just lost in her own mind, and that must be terrifying. Patricia has training for this, years of experience with dementia patients. But she doesn't have your instinct for it, the way you just seem to know what my mother needs in any given moment. I thought about that. Maybe it's because I'm not trying to fix her or bring her back to who she was. I'm just trying to be with her as she is right now, whoever that happens to be. That's love, he said softly. What you're doing, that's love. Not professional care or obligation, actual love. He was right, I'd realized over the past weeks. I loved Lucia, loved her sharp humor on good days and her vulnerability on bad days. Loved the way she'd squeeze my hand and call me kind girl, even when she couldn't remember my name. Loved that she'd somehow become the grandmother I'd never had, the connection to a generation and a culture I'd never experienced. And somewhere in the process of loving his mother, I'd fallen completely in love with Lorenzo. It happened gradually, then all at once. The way he'd show up at my apartment on weekends with groceries he insisted he'd overbought and couldn't use. The way he'd text me articles about cardiac rehabilitation that might help mom, or recipes for heart-healthy meals that didn't taste like punishment. The way he'd listen when I needed to vent about medical bills or insurance complications, offering advice without judgment. The way he'd look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, like I was something precious and rare. The way he'd kiss his mother's forehead every night before leaving, the gentleness in that gesture contradicting everything else about his controlled, powerful presence. We hadn't crossed physical boundaries beyond hand-holding and the occasional hug. The power imbalance was still there, the complication of me being his employee, the fact that I was still emotionally wrung out from Mom's health crisis. But the tension between us built steadily, awareness crackling in the air whenever we were alone together. Mom noticed, of course. Mothers always noticed. "When are you going to tell him?" she asked one Saturday morning while I helped her with exercises. "Tell him what?" "That you're in love with him." "Don't play dumb, Maya. I see your face every time his name comes up. I see how you light up when he texts you. That's not just gratitude or friendship. It's complicated, Mom. Love is always complicated, but life's too short to waste time pretending we don't feel things just because the timing's not perfect or the situation's not ideal." She grabbed my hand, stopping the exercise. "Your whole life, you've been so careful, so responsible, taking care of me instead of living your own life. Maybe it's time to be a little reckless, to take a chance on something good even if it scares you. What if it doesn't work out? What if I lose my job and we can't afford your treatment anymore? Then we figure it out. We always figure it out, don't we?" She smiled. "But Maya, what if it does work out? What if you get to be happy? Don't you think that's worth the risk?" I thought about that conversation all week. Thought about risk and reward, about fear and possibility, about all the ways love could break you and all the ways it could save you. 3 months into working for the Rossi family, everything changed again. It was a Friday evening in late November, cold and clear. I'd stayed later than usual because Lucia was having a particularly good day, lucid and present in a way she hadn't been in weeks. We'd made pasta together, her hands remembering the motions even when her mind couldn't recall the recipe. We'd watched an old Italian film and she'd laughed at jokes, actual comprehension, instead of just mimicking emotions. Lorenzo had joined us for dinner, something he did occasionally, and the three of us sat around the kitchen table like a real family. Lucia told stories about Lorenzo as a boy, embarrassing him with tales of childhood mischief. He pretended to be annoyed, but his eyes were warm, grateful for this glimpse of his mother as she'd been. After dinner, after Lucia had gone to bed with Patricia's help, Lorenzo and I stood in the kitchen cleaning up. The house was quiet around us, peaceful in a way that felt rare and precious. "Thank you for today," Lorenzo said, drying a plate I'd just washed. "For giving her such a good day. For being exactly what she needed. She's special. It's easy to care about her. It's not easy for most people. Most people see the disease, not the person. You see her?" He set down the plate, turning to face me fully. "Maya, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made my heart race. "Okay. I'm in love with you. I've been in love with you for weeks, maybe months. I've tried to be patient, to give you space, to wait for the right moment. But I don't think there's ever going to be a perfect moment, and I'm tired of pretending I don't feel this." The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, the air charged with possibility. "Lorenzo, I know you're my employee. I know there are complications, but I also know that what I feel for you is real, and I think what you feel for me is real too. So I'm asking, officially, Maya Santos, will you let me take you on a date? A real date. Not just time together at the hospital or in this house. Something separate from work, from your mother's care, from my mother's care." Just us, figuring out if this thing between us could be something more. I thought about all the reasons to say no: the power imbalance, the complications, the risk to my employment, and Mom's ongoing care. I thought about Mom's words: life's too short to waste time pretending we don't feel things. I thought about how Lorenzo made me feel seen, valued, cared for in ways I'd never experienced. How he'd shown up for me during the worst crisis of my life without expecting anything in return. How he loved his mother with a gentleness that suggested he'd love any woman in his life with the same fierce devotion. Yes, I said. Yes, I'll go on a date with you. The smile that spread across his face transformed him completely. He moved closer, slowly enough that I could stop him if I wanted, and cupped my face in his hands. I'm going to kiss you now, if that's okay. That's okay. He kissed me softly, carefully, like I was something that might break if he wasn't gentle. But then I wrapped my arms around his neck and kissed him back harder, pouring weeks of tension and want and need into that kiss, and his control broke. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me against him, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate and absolutely perfect. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to mine. I've wanted to do that for so long. Me too. But we're doing this right. Properly. Dating like normal people. Not just falling into something because of proximity and circumstance. Okay. What does dating look like for us? Tomorrow night, I'm taking you to dinner. Somewhere nice where we can actually talk without medical equipment or family complications. Just us, figuring out if we work outside of all the contexts we've known each other in. What about your mother? And my mother? Patricia can stay overnight with my mother, and we'll arrange for the visiting nurse to stay with yours. No excuses, no obligations. Just one night where we're not caregivers or employer and employee. Just Lorenzo and Maya. I nodded, still dizzy from the kiss. Just Lorenzo and Maya. I can do that. He kissed me again, softer this time, a promise rather than a claiming. Then Paul drove me home, and I floated into my apartment feeling lighter than I had in years. Mom took one look at my face and laughed. Well, it's about time. The date was perfect. Lorenzo took me to a restaurant I'd only seen in magazines, the kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance, and the menu had no prices listed. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. His childhood in Italy before immigrating. My memories of growing up with a single mother who worked constantly, but never stopped loving. His business, which he explained in vague terms that suggested organized crime without explicitly confirming it. My dreams of maybe going back to school someday, getting a degree in something that mattered. What would you study? He asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. I don't know. Maybe social work. Or nursing. Something where I could help people who are struggling the way we struggled. You'd be excellent at that. You have the compassion and the strength for it. It's just a dream. I can't afford school, and I need to work to support my mom. Dreams don't have to stay dreams. Sometimes they just need the right circumstances to become reality. After dinner, he drove me home himself instead of sending Paul. We sat in his car outside my apartment building, neither of us wanting the night to end. I had a really good time, I said. Me too. Can we do this again? Soon? Yes. Definitely yes. He walked me to my door, kissed me goodnight with a tenderness that made my chest ache, and waited until I was safely inside before leaving. Mom was still awake, reading in her chair. She looked up when I came in, taking in my flushed cheeks and happy expression. Good date? Really good date. I'm happy for you, baby. You deserve good things. She marked her place in her book. But Maya, promise me something. If this gets serious, if you start building a life with this man, Don't forget who you are. Don't let his world swallow yours whole. You're Maya Santos. You're strong and kind, and you've survived things that would break most people. Hold on to that, no matter what. I promise, Mom. Over the next few months, Lorenzo and I built something real. We dated properly, dinners and movies and long walks through parks where we could just be two people getting to know each other. We kept it separate from work as much as possible, maintaining professional boundaries at the house while exploring romantic ones outside of it. Lucia continued declining. By February, she rarely had good days anymore. Most days she was lost in the past, reliving memories from decades ago, not recognizing Lorenzo or me or Patricia. Some days she was agitated, frightened by things we couldn't see. Other days she was simply vacant, staring at nothing, existing but not really present. It was heartbreaking to watch. Lorenzo bore it with stoic grace most days, but I'd catch him sometimes in unguarded moments, grief written across his face as he watched his mother disappear piece by piece. "I'm losing her," he said one night after a particularly bad day. "She's still breathing, still alive technically, but the woman who raised me is gone. All that's left is this confused stranger wearing her face." I held him while he cried, rare tears that spoke to how much pressure he'd been carrying. "The woman who raised you is still in there somewhere, in the way she smiles when you walk in the room, even if she can't remember your name. In the way she reaches for your hand when she's scared. Love doesn't disappear just because memory does. I don't know how much longer I can watch this. Then we'll get through it together. Day by day, moment by moment. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." In March, Lucia had a stroke. Massive, devastating, the kind that changed everything. She survived, but the damage was extensive. Partial paralysis, complete loss of speech, inability to swallow safely. The doctors explained that she'd need a feeding tube, round-the-clock medical care, that her quality of life would be minimal. Lorenzo made the hardest decision I'd ever seen anyone make. He refused the feeding tube, chose hospice care instead of aggressive intervention, decided to let his mother go with dignity rather than prolonging her suffering for his own inability to let go. "I don't know if I'm making the right choice," he said, sitting beside Lucia's hospital bed while she slept, unaware of the decision being made. What if she could have more time? What if there's some miracle treatment we're not considering? There's no miracle treatment for Alzheimer's, Lorenzo. You know that. And the stroke took away what little quality of life she had left. You're not giving up on her. You're letting her go with grace instead of forcing her to suffer through interventions that would only prolong her dying, not her living. It feels like I'm killing her. You're not. The disease is killing her. You're just choosing to not torture her in the process." Lucia lived for 9 more days. 9 days of hospice care at home, in her own bed, surrounded by the people who loved her. Patricia managed the medical aspects while Lorenzo and I sat with her, holding her hands, playing the music she'd loved, reading her poetry in Italian that she couldn't understand, but seemed to find comforting. She died on a Tuesday morning in late March, with Lorenzo holding one hand and me holding the other. Her breathing simply slowed, became more shallow, and then stopped. Peaceful, quiet, as gentle an ending as someone could hope for. Lorenzo didn't cry at first. He just sat there, still holding his mother's hand, looking at her face that was finally free of confusion and fear. Then, very quietly, he said, "Ciao, Mama. Riposa bene." "Hello, Mama. Rest well." The tears came then, and I held him while he grieved. This powerful man reduced to a heartbroken son who'd just lost the person who mattered most. The funeral was 3 days later, a beautiful service at a Catholic church filled with flowers and Italian hymns. Dozens of people came, family I'd never met, business associates whose presence suggested Lorenzo's world extended into spaces I could only imagine. But through it all, He kept me close, his hand finding mine whenever the weight became too much. At the cemetery, as they lowered Lucia's casket into the ground, Lorenzo said something in Italian that I didn't understand. Later, he translated for me. May you find the peace in death that the disease stole from you in life. After the funeral, after the wake at the house, after everyone had finally gone home, Lorenzo and I sat in the sunroom where I'd spent so many afternoons with Lucia. The space felt empty now, haunted by her absence. What happens now? I asked quietly. With the job, I mean. You don't need a companion caregiver anymore. I need you, he said simply. Not as an employee, as my partner, as the person I want to build a life with, if you'll have me. Lorenzo, we've been dating for 4 months. That's not very long. I've loved you longer than that. And I've watched you handle crisis after crisis with grace and strength. I've watched you care for my mother like she was your own. I've watched you be exactly the kind of person I want beside me for whatever comes next. He took my hands. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm asking you to build something with me. Move in here. Let me help you finish your education. Let's figure out what our life looks like when it's not shaped by crisis and caregiving. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe. I thought about Mom's warning. Don't lose yourself in his world. I thought about the past 6 months, how my life had transformed from desperate survival to something approaching stability and happiness. I thought about Lorenzo, about the man who'd proven himself to be gentle and strong and completely devoted to the people he loved. Yes, I said. Yes. Let's build something together. He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And sitting in that sunroom, in the space where I'd learned to love an old woman with Alzheimer's, where I'd discovered that kindness could come back to you in unexpected ways, I felt something settle in my chest. Hope. Not just survival, but actual hope for a future that could be more than just getting through each day. 6 months earlier, I'd helped an old woman buy groceries because it was the right thing to do. I'd given $3 I couldn't afford to a stranger who needed help, and that small act of kindness had changed the entire trajectory of my life. It brought me Lorenzo, who'd seen something in me worth protecting and nurturing. It brought me to Lucia, who'd taught me that love didn't require memory, just presence and compassion. It brought me to this moment, sitting in a sunroom with a man I loved, planning a future that included education and stability and the possibility of happiness. Mom had recovered, her heart stronger than anyone expected. She'd started volunteering at a community center, helping other families navigate medical bureaucracy and insurance complications. Turned her own struggles into purpose, just like she'd taught me to do. And me, I'd enrolled in community college, starting the path toward a social work degree. Lorenzo had insisted on paying my tuition, and I'd stopped arguing about debt and repayment. Some gifts were meant to be received with grace, not calculated like transactions. We were building a life together, Lorenzo and I. Complicated and unconventional, crossing class boundaries and cultural differences, but real. Built on a foundation of genuine care, mutual respect, and the understanding that love sometimes came from unexpected places. All because of $3 spent on groceries for a confused old woman in SaveMart on a cold October evening. All because of kindness, given freely when it cost everything and returned in ways I never could have imagined. That's what I learned from Lucia Rossi, both in her life and in her death. That small acts of compassion ripple outward in ways we can't predict. That helping someone when you can barely help yourself is never wasted. That love takes many forms, and the most powerful form is often just being present with someone in their suffering. 6 months after Lucia's death, Lorenzo and I stood in the garden behind his house. The house that had become our house, planting a rose bush in her memory. Something beautiful that would bloom each spring, a living reminder of the woman who'd brought us together. She would have liked this, Lorenzo said, pressing soil around the roots. She would have liked that we found each other through her. Even if she couldn't remember it at the end, I think she'd be happy knowing her confusion led to something good. Everything with my mother led to something good. That's who she was. She made the world better just by being in it, by being kind, when kindness cost her, by seeing the humanity in people others overlooked. Just like you, I thought, but didn't say. Like mother, like son. We finished planting the rose bush as the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. And standing there with dirt under my fingernails and Lorenzo's arm around my waist, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt home. Not in a place, but in a person. In a life we were building together. In the knowledge that kindness, genuine and freely given, had the power to transform everything. That's what Lucia taught me. That's what her son showed me. That sometimes the smallest gestures, $3 for groceries, patience with a confused elderly woman, showing up when someone needs you, sometimes those small things become the foundation for everything that matters. I never saw that saint card again, the one Lucia had pressed into my hand that first night. Somewhere between hospital visits and moving and building a new life, it had gotten lost. But I didn't need it anymore. I'd found my own kind of grace. Not in religious imagery or protective talismans, but in the daily practice of showing up, of being present, of choosing compassion even when it was hard. That was Lucia's final gift to me. Not the job or the money or even the introduction to her son, though those things mattered. Her final gift was showing me that a life built on kindness, even when it's costly, even when it's hard, even when it seems pointless, that kind of life has meaning that transcends circumstance. And meaning, I'd learned, was worth more than all the money in the world. The rosebush bloomed that spring, and every spring after. Pink roses, fragrant and beautiful, a living memorial to a woman who'd forgotten everything but never stopped being kind. Just like her son. Just like the life we built together. All from $3 spent in a grocery store, and the choice to help when helping seemed impossible. That's how love works. Sometimes. Quietly. Unexpectedly. Transformatively. And that's how I learned that the Mafia boss's sick mother and my own sick mother had more in common than different. They were both just women who needed care, who needed someone to see them as human beings worthy of dignity and compassion. Everything else, the money and power and complications, that was just context. The story was always about kindness, and kindness, I'd learned, always finds its way home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.